The meeting of the Nottoway County Board of Supervisors is now called to order. This is a work session. It's a local emergency planning committee work session. We'll now have the invocation by Mr. Bowen.
All right, let's go to the Father. Lord, again, we thank you for this time that we can come together, and what a beautiful day. And Lord, we know there's so many blessings that you are planning to give us, and all we have to do is ask for it. So we have a special blessing for tonight. We thank you for VDM and their hard work, and we know they have helped us many times, and we're going into a new era, and we thank you for all the men and women in uniform who work so hard to keep us safe, and thank you for all that you do. We ask for the wisdom of you now, Lord, and not ours. Through Jesus Christ we pray. Amen.
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 Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We are very blessed tonight to have representatives from the emergency squad, the Blackstone Fire Department, Burkeville Fire Department, and also crew. And I also see some town managers, at least one of the town managers here. Is it any? And we have people from VDOT. I see Mrs. Bryan back there, and VDM.
Chief of Police from Crew. See, Chief of Police from Crew.
Chief of Police from Crew. I haven't met you yet officially, but I plan to. Unofficially. Well, now get Mr. Paxton, who is our county manager, to make the remarks, because he's far smarter and more knowledgeable about emergency planning than I am. Go ahead, Mr. Paxton.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, honorable members of the board, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, I'm reminded of the definition of an expert, one who knows more and more about less and less. So on that note, I want to thank everybody for being here this evening. By being here this evening, you're getting on a never-ending path of emergency preparedness that will inevitably loop to response and recovery and mitigation. In large part, what drives tonight's meeting is the February ice storm and the county's response management. While not directly involved in the county's response, I was on the periphery assisting in the provision of supplies as well as state-level personnel from my former position with the Virginia Department of Emergency Management. Some years ago, I was on the periphery of another event, the Virginia Tech mass casualty. My engagement in the aftermath of that event was to lead a planning team that produced the Commonwealth's first Family Assistance Center plan in templates for local use. But I also worked with Virginia Tech as they pursued accreditation under the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, which is a program tied to the National Governors Organization. Their pursuit was extremely successful, becoming the first institution of higher education in the world to achieve that accreditation. What I'm about to say, I've said before, and I've said in the presence of Virginia Tech officials. Sometimes you have to be on rock bottom to know which way is up, and Virginia Tech certainly was on rock bottom after April of 2007. Yet they were able to reach the absolute pinnacle of emergency management recognition for their emergency management program. I tell you this because, in my opinion, Nottoway County is not on rock bottom with its emergency management program, but it still knows which way is up and is on an upward trajectory. I say this based on the involvement that I've had with various first responder organizations since I've gotten here and the interest expressed in tonight's meeting in attendance. The realities are Nottoway County officials cannot stop ice storms or earthquakes or tornadoes. Nottoway County does not control health issues or much of the county's infrastructure such as roads, water, and sewer, or, and especially, the electric grid. Now, many people were beyond inconvenienced during the February event. Still, one of the great measures of emergency response in situations like that is the simple fact that in Nottoway County, no one died. Now, I know that others take a different view based on what they've heard, but the simple fact is I have consulted with the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner for the Commonwealth of Virginia, who, by law, is the entity that determines whether or not an event was the cause of someone's passing. My contact with that office, while still at VNM, revealed no deaths associated with the ice storm attributed to Nottoway County. That fact, however, does not lessen, as I've pointed out, that a great number of people suffered during the storm. As most here tonight know, there is an after-action report, or AAR, which is called for the establishment of a dedicated person for emergency management, which historically has fallen to the county administrator, along with many other duties with which that position has to address. Across the nation, it is not uncommon for those other things to take priority over emergency preparedness. Based on that AAR, the board authorized the establishment of a full-time emergency services director, and that recruitment has started. The ad and job description are out on the street, and several people in this room have provided input on the crafting of those documents, and I thank them for that effort. I'm also happy to report that many of the board members have taken various emergency management classes. In fact, just the other day, while meeting with Ms. Simmons, she proudly showed me her FEMA course completion certificates. So the board has taken to heart the lessons learned from the storm that will only benefit Nottoway County for years to come. Another piece of good emergency management program is the establishment of a local emergency planning committee, or LEPC. This is more than a board committee or a first responder association, but this is a whole of community concept, which is why all of you were invited here this evening. We have representatives of the media, not just to cover the meeting, but to participate in the meeting. We have representatives of fire services, the rescue squad, law enforcement. We have representatives of the private sector, particularly those who hold hazardous materials, and one of the guest presenters, obviously we'll get into more about that in just a moment. The schools were invited, but unfortunately this work session is in conflict with a school board meeting, but I've assured Dr. Grimes of a back brief on tonight's meeting. We have representatives from social services and other critical state service providers. We have a sign-up sheet going around, but I'm going to ask that if during the course of the presentations, if there's a question, please ask it. But in so doing, state your name and organization for the benefit of our guest presenters, and this too will emphasize the different perspectives that are coming in with, to round out that whole of community, whole of Nottoway County approach. So let's get started. Our presenters tonight are two former colleagues of mine. The first presenter will be Robert Paxton. Robert started in public safety in 1990 as a volunteer in Hampton, Virginia. He started his professional career in Newport News Fire Department in August of '92 and retired at the rank of captain after 23 years in June of 2015. Robert has served as the Hazardous Materials Officer for VNM Region 1, and Nottoway County is on the western edge of that, since 2016. Robert has served as a member of the Urban Search and Rescue Team, one of the two teams in the state, as a hazmat specialist, and has been to such events as the Winter Olympics in Salt Lake in 2002. Robert's also an emergency department technician, where he works various health systems in the ER as a paramedic. With the Virginia Department of Fire programs, he served as an instructor, and he has completed the FEMA National Fire Academy and Emergency Management Institute Professional Development Series. The second speaker this evening is Ms. Donna Pletch, who currently serves as the Chief Regional Coordinator for the Virginia Department of Emergency Management Region 1. In this role, she is responsible for leading a regional team tasked with assisting 23 localities, 5 tribal communities, and 6 public institutions of higher education, with all hazards disaster planning, training, exercise response, recovery, and mitigation efforts. Donna previously served as the Strategic Planning Branch Chief at VNM, responsible for the management, coordination, and oversight of the Commonwealth of Virginia Emergency Operations Plan and continuity planning for state agencies and institutions of higher education. And I'll just say that the person who hired Donna into VNM has to be an absolute genius. During declared emergencies, Donna has served as both the plans chief and the operations section chief in the Virginia Emergency Operations Center. Additionally, she has coordinated local and state support for non-declared and declared emergencies and events such as the Prince George County bus rollover. Donna is a certified FEMA continuity practitioner and an assessor for the Emergency Management Accreditation Program, of which I spoke earlier. Prior to working for VDEM, Donna worked for the Virginia Department of Transportation, where she managed statewide programs in support of transportation infrastructure security. Donna has also served as a crime prevention sergeant with the Virginia Division of Capitol Police, responsible for all anti-terrorism and crime prevention-related programs. So I'm going to turn the program over to Robert, then Donna, but I am going to again encourage folks as they present, if you have any questions, ask them, introduce yourself, say what organization you're with, and let the real experts, Mr. Vaughn, handle it. Yes, sir. Robert, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the introduction, Ted. Thank you for having me here to speak on local emergency planning committees. They're very important in helping mitigate disasters when they happen. It will help if you develop one and use one. It will help you actually figure out what kind of hazards you actually have in the area where you live. It helps you be more prepared. Do you have an LEPC here in Nottoway, or is this a new concept?
This is a start.
Okay, so I'm going to give a little bit of history on LEPCs. Why do we have them? Where did they come from? It's kind of important. I apologize for the folks who have trouble seeing this. We have handouts right out in the hallway that have every slide that you're going to see. What the things we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about when and why LEPCs came up. We're going to talk about the emergency planning and community right to know act, or maybe referred to as ESRA. This is the law. This is the stuff that came out of the disasters in our property. We're going to talk about the State Emergency Response Commission, the rules and responsibilities of the LEPCs, some tools available to help you plan for emergencies and respond to them. We'll look at a couple of events, significant events, just to give you some idea of what can happen. And we'll discuss briefly all-hazard LEPCs. For those that, well, many people don't know, but LEPC, the rules for LEPCs are required for hazardous materials. A lot of places run them all hazards, so we'll talk briefly about that. And we'll speak briefly about some grants, and then we'll talk about what kind of program we have here in the Commonwealth because of these things. All right. So the first significant event, you never heard of it, Bhopal, India, 1984, at the Union Carbide plant when they made pesticides. They had a release of a chemical called methyl isocyanate. Highly toxic, killed a lot of people. Apparently this plant was in a fairly densely populated area. And at that time, when you read back in the history, from our point of view, we're like, wow, that's awful that happened in India, but we didn't put a lot of stock in that because it happened somewhere far away from here. Right, well, as luck would have it. Not too long after that, the same thing almost happened in Institute of Virginia. Built by the same people who made the same product, had a different, less hazardous failure. Made a bunch of people sick. But about 6 months later, so we had 135 residents that saw treatment. 28 were admitted to the hospital. I can't find anything in the history where they said anybody was, where any death was attributed to that. So based on those two things, those two events, the government, from my point of view, the government it seems to be reactionary, so we do things because bad things happen. So they said, oh, we can't have that happening here, so they came up with the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act. It was passed by Congress in response to these two incidents. It was signed into law by President Ronald Reagan in 1986. It's commonly known as Title III of the Superfund Amendment to the Authorization Act. So in current, if you kind of hear it in its short form, most of the time they say Sarah Title III. So if you hear somebody say Sarah Title III, that's what they're talking about. It's the Community Right to Know Act. The four major sections, and I just put this in here for reference because the impression that I kind of got is that you want to start an LEPC committee, and these are the four major areas that you want to focus on. The emergency planning from section 301 to 303, and emergency release notification from section 304, and toxic chemical release And then just to define some of the specific duties that are handled by the LAPC, we have the establishment, Center Title III requires the establishment of the LAPC, but it's only really required for hazmat. But the law is focused on hazardous materials. Now, we have a couple of the LAPCs I go to focus only on hazmat, but most of the LAPCs do it an all hazard perspective. So they worry about hurricanes, they worry about tornadoes, they worry about, you know, all kinds of stuff. But it's only required from the federal side for hazardous materials. The idea is to try to identify the potential sources of where the emergencies would come from, develop response procedures, and do some planning. And we also, in that plan, we're going to designate who will coordinate the response. We also have to report anything that's considered an extremely hazardous substance under the EPA, and then we'll report any release of these covered substances. There's a whole bunch of federal documents that cover all that under the EPA and so forth. I'll send you Ted the resource documents that the government has for describing and kind of defining what an LAPC is and how you build it, so that he'll have them. So duties of the LAPC. Is anybody familiar with the Tier 2 report? I heard Ted say that there's somebody here from industry, so are you a reporter? Do you actually have to report, or do you get that? You have fuel, okay? So fuel is one of those things, if you have enough of it, you have to turn in a Tier 2
I'm sorry, I'm
report.
Crystal from VDOT.
That's okay. So they have enough fuel that they have to turn in a Tier 2 report. That's one of your first indications that you might have a hazardous material in your community. So there's a whole list of things that you have to report Tier 2 on. So the LAPC would collect those. We want to develop a community emergency response plan, and that plan should be reviewed annually. Okay, and the idea is to provide information about the chemicals in the community to the public. So we want people to be informed about what's here. All right. Membership, this is a really important side. Membership should cover a broad section of the community. The more people that are involved from various agencies, the better the LAPC is going to be. So you'd like to have first response personnel, law enforcement folks, some fire folks. You want some government officials, maybe from typically a couple of the LAPCs I sit on, somebody from the Board of Supervisors that attends those meetings, right? Just so that they're aware of what's going on. We want industry representatives like VDOT. If you have fuel or anybody that would have a hazardous material, you might be a good person to participate in the LAPC committee. And then also we want just citizens, people that may not have any other function than being a citizen in the community. We want them to be there too. Because remember the idea up here, we talked about getting the information out to the community and the public. Okay, so some basic duties of the LAPC. This is one of the planning tools that's available. It was originally referred to as the Orange Book. It's called the Hazmat Planning Guide. It originally came out in 1987. This one's been updated to a 2001 version. It's one of the resources that I've downloaded and will be able to provide for you. And we also have technical guidance for hazard analysis. This one was also issued in 1987. Notice these are issued right about the time when the community Russian war came out, so people started to develop resources for people to develop their LAPC. Again, referred to as the Green Book, and it's really talking about airborne release of those EHS or extremely hazardous substances under the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. And then there's a book, this is basic planning, it's called When All Else Fails. This was produced in 1990, and it helps you understand the LAPC program and APRA, the Employee Right to Know Act. It talks about submitting Tier 2 reports, and it also talks about some of the ways that you can document some of these things. There's a free software package that's put out by the EPA and NOAA, the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. They kind of partner in it, and it's a program where you can actually log Tier 2 reports, and you can use it for doing hazard analysis. So you can say, well, if I have a 1,000-gallon tank of this and it broke, what would the impact be? And you can develop models for plumes and stuff like that. The screenshot that you see there is a program called, a screenshot of a program called Tier 2 Submit. You can submit your Here in the Commonwealth, the people that collect those are the Department of Environmental Quality, and they prefer that Tier 2 reports be submitted to this electronic format. That makes it easy for them to collect the data and also make it a resource that we can actually get to. They submit their Tier 2 reports and they go to the SERC, which is the State Emergency Response Commission, the local LAPCs, and then also the local fire department. Anybody here from the fire department? There's a couple of fire folks. Anybody in the fire department ever seen a Tier 2 report? Yeah, so you're getting them, they're submitting them to you, and those go to the fire department because they're usually the first people on scene when we have this kind of problem, and they want them to have the information so that they know what's going on in the community hazmat. Cameo is the computer program I was talking about. It's actually a suite of programs, but you can look up chemical information, you can do plots, you can do all kinds of stuff. Like I say, it's free, it's supported by the government, and it's updated regularly. You can only run with the Windows right now, but it helps you plan and respond to chemical emergencies. A couple of screenshots. The three parts of the package are Cameo, Marquardt, and Lopop, and they have different functions, analysis functions. And you can use it, emergency responders can use it, and planners can use it. You can also input weather data if you want to do a simulation. You can put weather data in and see what the food would look like. You have, the example might be, say, is there a propane facility in Nottoway County where they do propane? Okay, so that's a good one. If you had a tank fail, you could go in and say, okay, I have a 10,000 gallon propane tank. If that tank fails, how far is the vapor going to go? How big is the cloud going to be? Where are the hazards going to be? You can use this program to kind of define that. If you want more information, again, this is in the handout. If you didn't get one, I'm sure there's some on the table that you can get on the way out. But there's a couple of web addresses. One is ETA that talks about EPRA, the Emergency Planning Right to Know Act. And then DEQ is kind of the one that kind of heads up that stuff in the Commonwealth. And so there's a link to their page that talks about the serotype. So from the state's perspective, we have a State Emergency Response Commission, and in that group we have something called the Secure and Resilient Commonwealth Panel. It's chaired by the Coordinator of Emergency Management, and they're the ones that help designate LAPC districts. They supervise the LAPC activities. They establish procedures for public release of information, and again, DEQ is the one that supports the kind of getting that information together. Any questions on any of the stuff we talked about so far? Okay, so a couple of other events that we'll look at.
Robert, I got a question. I'm hoping we can go first name basis here. So I saw this, you know, you're talking about the committee, you're talking about the different people in the community. And when I see the word committee, I think, how many people? I mean, a committee is a big word.
That's a really good question. So what is a committee in this case? What is a committee? A committee is the number of people that show up.
Okay.
Really, so you have to have somebody that chairs the committee.
Right.
And does all the like regulatory bits and pieces of it. So like using an example, Hopewell, they have a lot of industry there. And Hopewell has probably the most developed and most participated in LAPC that I go to.
Okay.
Believe it or not. They have people from all the big chemical plants there. We talk about chemical of the month. And when we talk about it, they talk about which of the companies use it, where they have it, what their safety procedures are, like do they have containment, what happens if we have a spill. They talk about all that stuff. So they can be really involved. Or another example I would use, folks familiar with Powhatan County, the emergency manager up there, they have an LAPC, but usually there's only maybe 6 of us there.
Right.
Right? But they still do all the same regulatory pieces. So
Yeah.
your food reports, they manage any hazmat releases, they report all that stuff. So it doesn't have to be, there's not like a set number of people. It doesn't have to be 30
Right.
people or 40 people.
Yeah, it's like, because I'm just thinking, it's like, I'm glad Crystal brought up VDOT, and because I remember Piedmont Hospital, we got 40,000 gallons of fuel oil there. And so I see all the entities, I mean, disciplines here, but is anybody from the railroad here? Yeah.
Well, yeah, so.
And so that's a problem, because it's a lot of hazard stuff that goes through our county.
I wish I knew more about the county and what kind of
Right.
stuff you had in the county hazmat-wise, but I know you have a rail line through here.
Yeah.
So, that's one of the things that LEPC would want to try to figure out. What chemicals are transported by rail through our county?
Yeah. The only thing we see is skeleton things on it.
Yeah, so, you can actually, if you set up an LEPC, you can actually go to the railroad and you can say, hey, can you tell me what is transported through my area? And they can give you an idea
Okay.
of what actually is transported on the lines, and they can give you some rough idea of maybe what the volume is.
Gotcha.
You can go one step further, and if you're willing to, you can go out and you can get a commodity flow study done. You can have somebody come in and they'll count all that stuff. They'll look at
Okay.
every rail car that comes through here, every tanker truck, and they'll give you a fairly good analysis of what they see over a period of time. And these are the kind of things that it takes to get a handle on what you need to be prepared for, and that's the whole idea. Well, if I see one car of this, and it's not that hazardous, but I see 60 rail cars of this, and this really ethyl methyl bad stuff, you don't want any, you want to drop that on the ground here, maybe that's something the LEPC wants to do, to make a plan. If this happens, what would we do?
Gotcha. All right, thank you, Rob, thank you.
And that's kind of what this is all about.
Right.
Trying to be prepared in case of an emergency. All right, so we'll look at a couple of, and most of these are kind of landmark events that have happened over time. The first one we're gonna look at is the chlorine release that happened in Graniteville, South Carolina. This happened at the worst possible time, 2 o'clock in the morning. All right, and 60 tons of chlorine was released. And this was a problem, somebody operating the track switch on the railroad, put the switch in the wrong position, we had cars get together, and boom, we got chlorine everywhere. 9 people were killed, 5,400 people were evacuated, and 554 were treated in hospitals. I almost guarantee you there's chlorine traveling on the railroad through Nottoway County. I don't know for sure, but I almost guarantee you there's chlorine traveling through this area by rail car.
County wastewater plant, everybody acknowledged still uses chlorine gas, and we have several hundred pound cylinders in there.
So you use the 1-ton containers there?
I don't know if they're exactly 1 ton, but we
Yeah.
still use chlorine gas for.
Yeah, so that's a big place. Chlorine gas is very common. It's a very common commodity to be transported. It's used for a lot of things, and water treatment is still one of them, particularly in rural communities. Chlorine is still has a big use in water treatment. So chlorine is one of those things that you see. The other thing that I know you see on the railroad here is sulfuric acid. You see highly concentrated sulfuric acid. It's the most transported commodity in the United States, transported by rail, transported by truck. If I put it on the ground in front of us and it's dry, there's not much of a problem other than it's corrosive, but if I get it in the water or it rains on it, things are not good. It's very reactive to water. Right? So that's a big one. What you'll find if you do a commodity flow study or you go out to count rail cars, you'll figure out that there's stuff you see a lot of and there's stuff you see just a tiny bit of. And that's part of the information that the LEPC tries to get. That's the goal.
Gotcha.
All right, so Granville, just to give you an idea, and this seems like it went pretty well when you read it, right? So in 1 minute, the 911 call went out. After 1 minute, in 2 minutes, the local fire department was on their way there. All right, in 6 minutes, the fire chief was on scene. And at 11 minutes, or 13 minutes, they determined that they needed to evacuate people, and they initiated a reverse 911 call to the residents, trying to get people to tell them what's going on. But even that, they say that some things didn't happen like they should have because they didn't plan. All right. The next one, anybody familiar with a fertilizer plant that's going in the town of West Texas? It happened in 2013. Anybody remember that? Basically, that all started, it was reported as a fire. That was the only report they got. It was somebody drove by and said, hey, this place is on fire. The fire department shows up, and there's a fire. What do firemen do? They put water on stuff. They have no idea what's actually in this building. The only chemical that they're actually aware of on the site, when you read the report, is the anhydrous ammonia. They had tanks of anhydrous ammonia there, and they're aware of that because that's a reportable thing. Anybody do farming here? Anybody do any of that? They use the ammonium nitrate, which is the chemical that was involved here. It's a fertilizer, right? You can go to Lowe's, Home Depot, Tractor Supply. Any of these places you can buy ammonium nitrate fertilizer, right? Very common. Very stable. I can pour it on the ground, I can step on it, crush it with a hammer, pipe is good. But if I heat it and I contaminate it with an organic product, it becomes highly volatile. All right. We've had big events with ammonium nitrate. The Murrah building, that was an ammonium nitrate explosive. Anybody familiar with Texas City, 1947? The Grand Camp, there was a ship. Well, actually, two ships there. They were cargo ships, and they had basically bags of ammonium nitrate pearls. All right, so the ship catches fire, right? For those that are not aware, the way we fight shipboard fires is we close the door. We start it for oxygen. When ammonium nitrate is an oxidizer, it supplies its own oxygen, the fire doesn't really go out. But because of the material from the bags and the confinement, that turned into a huge bomb and basically killed every fireman in Texas City and wiped out the entire waterfront. Right? The cool thing about this is that when they built this place, it was out in the middle of nowhere. There was nothing there. Just like you would want a place like this to be, no people around. Well, due to lack of planning and lack of knowledge on the county or city's part in that area, they allowed schools, nursing homes, and houses to be built at the fence line of this facility, not really knowing what was happening, right? As an LEPC, if they had a good active LEPC, they might have figured that out and said, hey, maybe we shouldn't let people build there, right? Or maybe we need to tell people, hey, if you build there, there's this place right here. This is what they do. So the long and the short of the West Texas explosion is the fire department gets there, they start fighting the fire. They're not getting anywhere because, again, this material produces its own oxygen. It's hard to extinguish. And because this was stored loosely in bulk in wooden bins, the wood started to burn. The carbon from burning the wood contaminated the ammonium nitrate. Eventually, there was enough pressure and heat for the ammonium nitrate to detonate. All right, and destroyed a lot of stuff. And like I say, there were things right at the fence line, schools, nursing homes, that kind of stuff. They filed tier 2 reports. They had ammonia, right? They had anhydrous ammonia on site. So they filed tier 2 reports, but at the time, that was not something that you were required to report on tier 2, ammonium nitrate. So the firemen didn't know the hazards of ammonium nitrate. If they didn't know the hazards, they were going, hey, we probably need to not go too close to that. We probably need to stay back and that kind of stuff. Let's see. We kind of talked about most of that. So here's this picture's kind of hard to see, but in that mass in the middle there, right, in this area here, that's where the fertilizer plant used to be. Almost completely gone. And there's lots of videos. If you're interested, you go to YouTube and you put West Texas fertilizers, you'll see cell phone videos. People say, wow, that's on fire, it's bright, and they're holding their cell phone, and the next thing you know, their cell phone's flying all over the place because there was a very large explosion. West Texas. Anybody familiar with Lapc? Anybody ever heard of that? It's Canadian mine. Basically, what they were hauling through there at that time were rail cars filled with Lapc crude oil. Apparently, the rail line has just a little bit of a slope from where the train was parked, and unlike most crude oil, it's ready to burn. It's very volatile in its natural state. It doesn't need much refining, right? Well, apparently, somebody left the train unattended, and the brake wasn't set properly. The train started to move down this 1.2-degree incline, and it rolled down the track into the middle of town where it derailed. Okay, the train it released a million and a half gallons of oil. They had several explosions of a large fire. Here's a couple of pictures. The one on the right was obviously when it was actively burning. The one on the left was kind of later. The interesting fact I found about this one when I looked was that about half the homes, about half the structures in downtown were destroyed by fire, and all but 3 of what was left had to be condemned and torn down because of the contamination from the oil. So, for those that are not aware, we had Balkan crude coming through our area. I don't know if it came this far south, but it was going to Yorktown to be loaded on ships to go to refineries, and that was a big planning issue, both at the state and local level in that area. You're not seeing any Balkan oil right now. Just because that oil is ready to burn, it's a higher hazard than, like, say, crude oil that comes from, like, the Middle East. Right? But yeah, most of the downtown area was completely destroyed or had to be torn down. All right, so one of the other things that we need to do is kind of risk assessments, and we kind of touched on some of them. You would want to look at trucking routes, right? See what kind of trucks roll through here. Look at pipelines. Do you have any pipelines in Nottoway? Any of the, like, Colonial or Plantation, Columbia, any of those pipelines in Nottoway? I know they're not far up the road in, like, there's a big Colonial facility in a couple of counties up. Which one is it? I'm drawing.
Is it near Columbia?
No, Colonial. There's a.
Yeah, but I'm trying,
No,
Amelia has them.
it's not Amelia. This is up kind of in the mountains.
Well, Goochland,
Huh? Goochland, somebody say Goochland. It's south of Goochland.
Louisa,
Look this up. This is gonna drive me crazy.
Louisa,
No, it's further south than that. You're making me look this up.
Buckingham.
And Region 1.
Robert, while you're looking that up, wasn't the Bakken crude what, there was a the derailment in Lynchburg?
Ted, I honestly don't remember.
I can't remember, that was,
I think it was.
I think that was Bakken crude, yeah.
It burned, it certainly burned pretty easily.
It was in the river burning.
Yes, that was in the river burning. And as a side note, the railroad donated one of those cars that was on fire to the Hazmat Training Center in Yorktown. We have one of those on our site that we use to train responders and damage assessment, which is kind of cool.
And I will say, after one of these incidents, Ted, I know that the federal government required rail lines to report Bakken crude shipments to the state, and then we in turn would send out that information to the locality, so you would know Bakken crude is coming to the locality.
Yeah, and it was a pretty big deal. The railroad actually paid for responders to go out to Surtsey in Colorado, paid the bill completely. Airfare, room and board, training for people to train on working with Bakken crude oil. We probably sent, well, several hundred responders out to that training from the Commonwealth. All right, let's see if I can figure this out. Like I said, we're driving crazy by now.
You might not get a good signal here, and please don't bring up broadband at this meeting.
Yes, sir. I'm not talking about it. Yeah, I've been there.
While Robert's looking that up, I want to ask you, are you guys aware of businesses that might store a lot of chemicals here? Are you aware of those?
We do get those reports. Susan gets those reports, and she has them filed in back behind her desk. So we receive them, the fire departments receive them, so we are aware.
Yeah.
Yeah, so we already talked about a big one, a big propane storage facility. That's good. So it's in Cumberland County. There you go. It's in Cumberland
Let's start
County.
with a C.
That was my next guess.
Yeah, and so that pipeline kind of runs across different parts of Virginia, so I don't know if any of that's here or not.
Right.
But we have several pipelines that run through the area, right?
Right.
Hazmat rail lines, we talked about that. I don't think we have many hazmat shipping lines in the marine here. So if we talk a little bit about local businesses that store and use chemicals, a long time ago, almost anybody that had any amount of these chemicals had to report. So the mom and pop gas station, they had to report. But tier 2 reporting has gotten way less over the years. You have way less people required to report. And you can get to most of these places if you call and say, hey, you know, we're with the LEPC and we want to come and see you and we want to see your facility and get some information. Most of these people are more than willing to talk to you, right? Because they know that the LEPC is mandated under federal law and they know that they have to comply. They have to give you information you ask for if you're representing a local emergency planning committee. We talked a little bit about commodity flow studies. That's one way to figure out what's going on with trucking and rail. There are companies that do that that can help you with that. So risk assessment. And there is a little bit of challenge in rural LEPCs. We kind of talked about that. But it's hard to figure out what your transportation routes are. You may not have a lot of like big chemical manufacturing facilities here, but you still have a lot of chemicals coming through your area that you just don't think about via truck and rail, right? And the other thing to know is how close is the nearest capable hazmat team. For those that aren't aware, the hazmat team that comes to Nottoway comes from Henrico. It's the team that I work with the most. 99 out of 100 things that you do here, you probably don't need a hazmat team for because it's mostly like leak and spill stuff of common fuels, right? But there's a hazmat team and a hazmat officer available if you need help. The other question is, are your local hospitals, and it's funded from the hospital, right? Local hospitals, are they appropriately equipped to handle somebody that has been affected by one of these disasters? Have they done training at the hospital level for that? So that's another good thing to try to figure out.
If I may, you were talking about the tier 2 reporting has kind of slowed down
Yes, sir.
in recent past. Who sets the standards for reporting the tier 2 reports? Is that federal, state, or?
So it's based on reportable quantities, and if I believe that comes from the EPA. Anybody ever heard of the EPA list of lists? It's actually what it's called, the list of lists.
Mhm.
And it lists all these chemicals, all these things. These things have reportable quantities, and if you meet the reportable quantity on that list, it has to be reported. And I think, well, this has been many years back, probably years ago now. They changed those reportable quantities on a lot of things, and they made those reportable quantities a lot larger, right?
Right. Well, because that kind of leads up to my next question. Can the local officials, whether it be in the town or the county, can they put requirements in place for those reportings? Or will we be overstepping our boundaries?
I'm probably the wrong person to ask about that. I would maybe reach out to a Commonwealth attorney, somebody that has that kind of expertise.
Okay.
I know that from a state perspective, we have to meet the minimum on federal law, but we can be more strict than federal law. An example would be, that I can think of right off the top of my head, is the hazard level that we have for an oxygen deficient atmosphere. We are way more conservative than what the federal government says.
Right. Okay. All right. Thanks.
So I'm sorry I can't answer that, but I will try to find out.
Yeah, that's fine.
That information, I'll get it back to you. So we briefly talked about all hazard LEPC. Remember, the LEPC program is put in place really to cover hazardous materials. But a lot of places take advantage of the LEPC, having all those parties together to talk about other things and be prepared for other disasters. Maybe as residents here, maybe you can think back and figure out, well, you know, I don't see a lot of hazmat, but I see a lot of ice storms, or I see a lot of snowstorms, or I see a lot of, you know, hurricanes, whatever. You could use the same process to be prepared for those emergencies, that same LEPC process to prepare for those as well. So I don't know what kind of things you see here, but I heard Ted talking about the ice storm that you had in February, and I know we've had like rainstorms and snowstorms and things like that, but as residents, you may know, well, we see a lot of this, but we don't see hardly any of this, and focus on those really common things first. But, yeah, so the LEPC can be all hazard. So localities get LNPG grant funds, and some of that money could be used to fund things like commodity flow studies, writing and updating emergency plans, and even conducting exercises in support of your emergency plans. The best way to test your plan is to exercise, right? I'll be honest with you, I've done a lot of exercises in my time, and we have never done an exercise where everything went perfect. We've always found something that needed to be changed, updated, done different. You know, we always find something. So exercises are a good thing to work towards too. So what kind of response do we have at the state level? So here in the Commonwealth, we have 10 hazmat specialists in the Commonwealth. The Commonwealth, if you look in the code basically says, hey, you have to have a hazmat response program, and by the way, since you have a response program, you have to have a training program. So we have 10 hazmat specialists. 8 of us are kind of pseudo-assigned to regions. So I'm the Region 1 guy. You'll notice in Region 5 we have 2, because that area is kind of special down that way. And then the guy at the top, Brian Iverson, he's a rad protection person. So he's a radiation specialist. And then Tom Jordan, the guy at the top on the left, that's the boss. That's the guy that we all work for. And I wish he was here to say hello, but he's your biggest advocate. He really believes in keeping people safe. And he is the one that does the training program in Yorktown that we operate. We train about 300 people a year to give them advanced hazmat skills. So we, to get the term hazmat specialist here in the Commonwealth, we have to go to 240 hours of training. Start out with 80 hours of hazmat technician, 80 hours of hazmat chemistry, and then 80 hours of advanced hazmat stuff. We have one of the premier training programs in the country. We're pretty proud of it. And we hope we do everything we can to keep everybody safe. All of us have response vehicles. We carry advanced detection monitoring gear, and we're subject matter experts, so we can assist anytime that you need something. Only a phone call away. The state gives me this little guy right here, with the understanding that I answer it 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, which unfortunately I do. So if anything happens in the middle of the night and you need something, we're here, right? I left cards out on the table out there if anybody wants a card. Don't pay attention to the headphone address, cell phone number, email address are still the same. In summary, the Community Right to Know Act and the formation of the LEPCs are important pieces in planning for and responding to events that involve hazardous materials. We can promote safety and comply with federal law by informing and educating the public and first responders about those potential hazards in and around our community. All right. So in closing, I would beg you to just watch the 6-minute video. Right. And basically, it's a look at those 2 incidents we talked about up front: the low-call incident and the Institute West Virginia incident. And then it talks about all the bad things that have happened since then. And when you look at it, you realize that we still have a lot of planning to do. You would think with bad things happening that we would make progress and do a lot better, but we still suffer from the same stuff. So if you don't mind, we'll play this video. It's like I say, about 6 minutes, and then we'll take any questions and be available for that. I apologize if the volume is not loud enough, but we're gonna make it work.
December 2nd, 1984. The Union Carbide India Limited Pesticide Plant in Bhopal, India. Water inadvertently entered a storage tank containing more than 80,000 pounds of methylose carbonate, or MIC, which was known to react violently with water. This caused a runaway reaction that overheated the tank and resulted in a massive toxic gas release, exposing hundreds of thousands of people to deadly MIC and other chemicals. An estimated 3,800 people died immediately, and tens of thousands were injured. Eventually, thousands more died from toxic gas-related illnesses in what had become history's worst industrial accident. Investigations found many process safety management deficiencies, including the absence of a process hazard analysis, poorly maintained equipment and safety systems, a lack of emergency response planning, and inadequate training for operators handling the deadly MIC. But others saw a deeper root cause. The father of process safety, the late Dr. Trevor Kletz, wrote, "MIC wasn't a raw material or a product, but an intermediate. Storing it was convenient, but not essential. It could have been used as it was made, then the worst leak would have been a few kilograms." The huge MIC release at Bhopal was a watershed event in the drive to make plant designs inherently safer. In the wake of Bhopal, Congress enacted new laws to increase chemical emergency preparedness and to require companies to develop process safety and risk management programs and to report their worst-case release scenarios. Congress also established the Chemical Safety Board to investigate chemical accidents and recommend measures to prevent catastrophes. But despite these positive actions in the 1990s, the United States continues to experience serious chemical accidents.
Process safety management regulations are in need of reform. There must be more emphasis on preventing the occurrence of major chemical accidents through safer design, responding to emergencies, and punishing people after the fact are not enough.
Even now, CSB investigations following major accidents find deficiencies in design and process safety management similar to those uncovered in Bhopal. In 2008, an explosion killed 2 workers and injured 8 others at a pesticide plant in Institute, West Virginia. It was originally developed by Union Carbide. The explosion took place during a lengthy startup process when a runaway chemical reaction occurred inside a waste treatment vessel. Had the exploding vessel taken a different trajectory, pieces of it could have struck piping connected to a storage tank containing 13,700 pounds of methyl isocyanate, potentially causing a large release of the same highly toxic chemical that killed thousands in Bhopal. The CSB's investigation found that factors similar to those reported in Bhopal led to the explosion, including incomplete operator training and procedures. In 2012, a massive fire put workers' lives at serious risk at a refinery in Northern California. The CSB found that the company repeatedly failed over a 10-year period to upgrade corroded piping using inherently safer materials. Eventually, the pipe became so thin it ruptured. And in 2013, 15 people were killed and more than 200 were injured from an ammonium nitrate explosion in West Texas. The explosion caused widespread damage to homes, schools, and businesses up to a half-mile away. Similar to the Bhopal disaster, emergency response plans were inadequate, and community members were not aware of the potential hazard in their midst. The CSB has found that current federal and state regulations do not focus enough on preventative measures or continuously reducing process risks. Therefore, the CSB has urged that federal or state process safety management regulations be reformed to require reducing risks to specific goals, using the most current industry standards, and ensuring that these standards contain adequate minimum requirements, applying the hierarchy of controls with safe design as the preferred strategy, and using inherently safer technologies wherever feasible, conducting damage mechanism hazard reviews, analyzing the effectiveness of safeguards, increasing attention to organizational safety, and broadening regulatory coverage to include reactive chemicals and atmospheric storage tanks. Following the Northern California refinery accident, the CSB recommended many of these changes to process safety management regulations in California, which the state is now actively pursuing.
We are hopeful that similar process safety management reform will take place at the federal level.
In August 2013, President Obama issued an executive order which directed federal agencies to modernize and improve chemical facility safety. In response, both OSHA and the EPA plan to revise their process safety management regulations. To further encourage these positive changes, the board has voted to include process safety management reform on the CSB's list of most wanted safety improvements.
Both industry and government have increased their efforts to prevent chemical accidents. But the CSB investigations show that much more needs to be done to assure that future tragedies will be avoided.
So, I don't know if anybody picked up on what he was talking about, but, the Chemical Safety Board was one of those things that came out of that law that they passed in 1986. For those of us that do hazmat, we use a lot of the Chemical Safety Board videos for training, and for learning. It's interesting to see what they actually find when they send engineers in to look at how an accident occurred and things that they should have done to prevent that they didn't. From process safety, like they talked about, from responder training, community awareness, all those things, they CSB covers that. So, Chemical Safety Board, all their stuff is available via YouTube. You can look at it on the internet. I don't think probably most people in this room don't do that. That's what the hazmat guy does on Friday night, right? We sit around and watch Chemical Safety Board videos. With that, that's really all I got. I'm willing to answer any questions that you have about what we talked about, or anything hazmat-wise, really. And if there's not, that's okay.
Well, Donna, why don't you go ahead and do your presentation? And we did.
Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Again, I'm Donna Lapc. I'm the Chief Regional Coordinator for Region 1. Region 1 in VDOW covers Ledc counties primarily around the Richmond metro area, out east to Essex, and then all the way down to the North Carolina border. So 23 localities, as Ken mentioned earlier, 5 tribes and 6 educations of higher institution. So I'm here tonight with Amanda Weaver, who's our all-hazards planner. So I just want to talk to you briefly about a few things. I'm standing between some of you and dinner, or some of you maybe in putting your kids to bed. So maybe my comments will be brief. I did leave a handout outside that talks about training. And I do want to talk about training to the board and to the members here tonight. Training is really important when it comes to emergency management. So the training that's outlined on that handout are the basic courses that are really going to be needed by the people that would work in your emergency operations center. So as you move forward and as you hire a full-time emergency services coordinator, part of the responsibilities are going to be identifying who's going to work in that EOC. Okay, and I apologize, we use a lot of acronyms at the end. So, but who's going to work in there? And I know some of you have worked in there before. You got trial by fire. But having this training will help you all understand better how you can work together. And then if you get others that come in and assist you, they're all trained the same way. That's the beauty of it. So people can come in and assist you. They know exactly what their role is when you give them a position. And you're going to know what your role is, and you can kind of plug and play. And then you can have people actually take a couple of days off, and other people can fill in, and they should know their role as well. So the training is really important. Like I said, it's basic. Some of it you can do online. It's not, you don't have to actually go into a classroom. There are a couple of classes that you would need to take, preferably in person, but I believe some of that now due to COVID, they're actually FEMA's offering it virtually. So that's something new for us. So there are some offerings of that. Amanda sends out a training announcement every week with any updated training being offered in the state. So that will come out. Right now it's going to Ted and Mr. Paxton, and it'll go to the emergency services coordinator when that person's on board. So you can stay up on any of the training offerings. We do also have training for elected officials so that all elected officials kind of understand their role. That's something we can come here and offer as well. I will say that the preparedness materials also are out on the table out there. That's just some basic, how to build a kit, like a preparedness kit, that type of information. We have a lot of that online. If you need others, you can download it. The other thing I would say to you, and weather, things that you can just pull right down from the VDM website and use as is to post out on social media, or put, you know, even send it to the local newspaper. So we do a lot of that now for you, so, you know, you can just kind of make it your own. If you need to change it, put your name on it and send it out there. So it's a lot of the work is being done for you. I wanted to say that as Region 1, we have myself, Amanda, Robert, and I had a disaster response and recovery officer who was on a well-deserved vacation this week. But we're here to assist you. As we did during the ice storm, we came down to assist. We sent some resources down to assist. But it is important that you build your program up, because if we have a lot of localities impacted, we can't assist them all. So being self-sufficient and being able to do some things on your own is really important, and that's why we're here tonight to talk to you about the training and setting up the LEPC. I think those are really, really good steps to take to build your emergency management program. Once, you know, when things go on, I will say that all of the information from the state, from the VDM level, comes down directly to the Emergency Services Coordinator. So I would encourage all of the elected officials within the county, any others that are major stakeholders, please coordinate your information flow back through that Emergency Services Coordinator. That will come back up to the state, the situation reports, and then we'll pass information back down to them, which that person should then distribute out. Okay? So that's the way it works best, is to funnel it all. And if you have Emergency Operations Center open at that time, of course, that's the hub, and it'll all go through that Emergency Services Coordinator. I will say that I want to commend the board for recruiting for a full-time Emergency Services Coordinator. That is a huge, huge step in the right direction. I cannot commend you enough. I wish there's some other localities that have part-time ones, and that is a huge concern for my state coordinator, the director of VDM. He has been out meeting with some of the smaller localities and trying to impress upon them the importance of hiring somebody full-time to do this. It's not something that you can wear a bunch of different hats, you know, like they do in a lot of localities, so I commend you for that. And thank you for having us here tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming. Thank you.
See, I told you I'd be between them and dinner.
You're going to open up the question and answer.
We will, you know, one more offer for questions or answers. I'd encourage, you know, a lot of the representatives of the fire folks, if you haven't met Robert, meet Robert, get to know Robert, because you'd rather meet him here, even though you're hungry and you want to go home and eat dinner. Apparently that seems to be a repeated theme here. You're better off to meet him and talk to him here than you are on the side of a railroad crossing. So any questions from anyone?
I will say, once you set up your LEPC, don't be surprised if we show up. You know? So we won't be at every meeting, but we do show up at LEPC.
I will try to be at every meeting you have.
You know, Ted, it's not a question, it's more like a comment, I guess, Robert, just, you know, so when you get in this position, you'll see things in a different view, you know how that works. So I could see that this LEPC, it's got to be a connect with our planning commission also. You know, when you brought up that video of, you know, people start building around the plant, if they don't know that it's there, they don't know that it's there. You're right. And so that's something, Ted, I just, you know, now and then my light bulb goes off and I was like.
The LEPC is kind of the group that kind of watches out for that kind of stuff.
Right.
And hopefully they get integrated with people that do planning and stuff like that.
Yeah, I got you. That's something, you know, anyway, thank you.
Well, I would have a follow-up with you. You said Hopewell has one of the better LEPCs out here.
They have the most involvement in any LEPC I've ever been to. And they have representatives from probably 8 or 9 different manufacturers.
Would they be open to letting, say, like myself or other representatives visit the meetings?
Well, I hate to speak for Ben Rupert, who runs that, but I think I will, and I think I'll safely say that if you approach him and say, I want to come to your LEPC meeting and see what happens, he is more than happy to have it.
Right, yeah, because I mean, I would absolutely volunteer for this in a minute, you know, from.
We might be able to put you in touch with some other folks that have an LEPC that may be more on the line of what you want to start.
All right.
Right.
Yeah, so that's the reason why I was asking, because I would like to see one that's functioning well and well attended.
Yeah.
So.
Some of their bylaws bylaws, you know, any of those types of documentation. I've already gotten some from Palatine, he sent me theirs, which is a smaller LEPC, but I can get them from Hopewell. I've already asked for a copy of them, so I can get those and share those through Ted, you know.
Sure.
Yeah, I would venture to say, I can't think of any of the people that routinely run LAPC that wouldn't be happy to have you there. If you want to see how the LAPC was set up. LAPC meetings, they used to be pretty good, and then COVID came, and everybody, we tried virtual, we've done a couple virtual, and we're just starting to get back to seeing everything, but using Hopewell as an example, I don't think we missed a beat. We had a virtual meeting every month during COVID, except for maybe a couple times when, they had, all their resources were tied up doing vaccinations or whatever, so.
Okay. I'll get with you and get that information and to reach out to you.
Donna is a good resource for some of the people that have LAPCs too.
Donna's a great resource. I mean, she referred to us as elected officials and not politicians. Yeah. I love that terminology.
I will say that the public safety field in general, we tend to share things. I know my public safety partners in here, we're all about not recreating the wheel. So, and so are the other, all the localities are the same way. So yeah, I think most of them would be willing to share what they're doing with you for sure.
Great.
So Donna, in addition to maybe trying to visit an up and running LEPC meeting and spending some time maybe with that local EM, what other next steps would you all suggest?
Well, I think I'm excited for you to get your emergency services coordinator hopefully hired soon. And I think.
Thank you for helping recruit, by the way.
Yes,
Yeah, yeah.
I did send it out far and wide. That advertisement has been sent out everywhere. Well, their plan, I will say, I know your EOP is due to be updated. I know they submitted for a grant to do that. I asked today, once again, and I think they're getting tired of me asking, when is that grant gonna get announced? I've been told that it will be announced the end of the month now. Previously, I thought I'd been told in the middle of the month, but now it's the end of the month. So hopefully we'll know that within the next 2 weeks, and you'll have an idea where you can go with that. I would say the next steps is determining too, who is gonna work in your emergency operations center. And I want to say that, just because you do something in your regular day job doesn't mean that you are just going to do that when you go into the EOC, okay? You may have a person who knows everybody, and if they know everybody and know where to find things, then they're your logistics person. So when you need widgets, they can find you widgets, right? And I say, you probably have some of those within the police department, but you need to find a person who writes well, and who can write really well and doesn't need to be edited, who can do your public information and push things out the door, or your situation reports that are gonna go out to a lot of people in the community, maybe or go up to the state. So identify those key people who can fill roles, but also identify an alternate. You're gonna have an emergency services coordinator, that person is gonna need to at some point go to sleep if we have a disaster that lasts several days. So who's gonna be their alternate? So I would say that would rise to the top is who's gonna do what. Sometimes I call that who's who in the zoo, and then I would look at what's your emergency operations center. I know the facility we were in was really tight, so I would look at what are your options to set up an emergency operations center if we had to do that. So I think those to me, in my mind, would rise to the top along with the plan. The plan is a longer process to get your emergency operations plan up to date. But I think you'd be really prepared if you could identify those people, get them through that training, and then I'd say, where are we gonna meet to do this at? Then you can look at, okay, that room doesn't have the equipment we need, let's look at a grant to apply to get the equipment we need. Amanda, am I missing anything? Yeah, that's where I would start.
Okay.
It's gonna be an iterative process, it's gonna take you a little bit, but we're here to support you in any way we can. And I know you're gonna get there, so we've got good leadership to get there. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I'd like to thank both of you all for coming, and thank the volunteers for also coming to this meeting tonight. Donna, a special thanks to you because you helped us through the ice storm.
Absolutely, yeah. There were others as well, but in the background, but yes,
Yes.
we're here to support you.
Any more concerns or questions? This meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you all for coming.
Now take a look.